There are moments when the sky becomes so deliberate that ignoring it almost feels impossible. This is one of those moments. If you have carried the strange feeling that something invisible has been gathering beneath the surface, as though life has been preparing you for a conversation you could not yet hear, then what unfolds on July 26th may explain why. Today, Saturn, the planet associated with time, responsibility, discipline, consequences, and everything created through patience and persistence, begins its retrograde journey in Aries. This is far more than another planetary movement passing quietly across an astrology calendar. It represents one of the most meaningful structural turning points of this entire year, and there is a strong argument that its influence could echo throughout the decade ahead. That is exactly why this message cannot wait. Before this energy fully settles in, there is something you deserve to understand. 3 zodiac signs stand on the edge of receiving rewards that have not appeared by chance, but through years of unseen effort, silent endurance, and choices that often went unnoticed by everyone around them. These are not small victories or temporary moments of good fortune. They resemble karmic breakthroughs that have the power to transform entire chapters of life, the kind of turning point where everything cultivated quietly behind closed doors finally becomes impossible to overlook. Yet there is another side to this story that deserves equal attention. During every Saturn retrograde, people often make one subtle mistake without realizing it. That single pattern can interrupt the very opportunity trying to reach them. Instead of allowing the next chapter to arrive, they unknowingly resist it. Later, I will explain exactly what that pattern looks like and why recognizing it may determine whether you receive what has already been prepared for you. For now, however, we have to begin by looking upward, because the sequence of events unfolding in the heavens is extraordinary. And once every piece falls into place, many of the emotions, doubts, and unexplained pressures you have experienced throughout this month may suddenly become understandable. None of this has appeared overnight. The universe has been arranging this moment step by step, almost like a carefully written story whose opening chapters have been unfolding since the beginning of July. Saturn never changes direction without leaving clues first. Its retrograde does not arrive as a random interruption. It grows gradually, asking for attention long before the official station occurs. Think back over the emotional atmosphere of this month. Has something felt slightly different, as though your usual rhythm no longer fit the life around you? Many people have sensed that invisible tension even if they could not explain it. The opening days of July carried remarkable intensity. During the first week, Mars formed its challenging square to the lunar nodes, creating friction between action and destiny, between movement and true purpose. It was almost as if the universe stood in front of every decision and quietly asked whether your energy was carrying you toward your authentic path, or simply keeping you occupied with motion that no longer served your future. That question lingered beneath everyday experiences, whether you consciously recognized it or not. Then another defining moment arrived on July 6th, when the Sun formed its exact square to Saturn. For countless people, that period felt like walking directly into an invisible wall. Progress slowed. Plans seemed heavier than expected. Every attempt to force open a closed door only emphasized how firmly it remained shut. Perhaps you questioned yourself. Perhaps you wondered whether you had lost momentum or somehow failed. Perhaps frustration quietly transformed into exhaustion because nothing appeared to respond, no matter how sincerely you tried. Those experiences were not meaningless delays. They were part of a much larger preparation. What appeared to be resistance was quietly revealing where your foundations required greater honesty and where your determination needed deeper roots. During the past several days, however, another current has begun flowing beneath the surface, and this is where the story becomes especially remarkable. On July 22nd, the Sun entered Leo, its home sign, restoring warmth, confidence, vitality, and the courage to remember who you are beneath months of uncertainty. It felt as though a forgotten light slowly returned, allowing many people to reconnect with their own inner certainty. Then, only yesterday, Mercury finally turned direct in Cancer after weeks of retrograde confusion that blurred communication, distorted perception, and surrounded conversations with emotional fog. Suddenly, thoughts become easier to organize, feelings become easier to understand. Decisions no longer seem buried beneath endless second-guessing. This renewed mental clarity is arriving at precisely the moment it is needed most. That timing is anything but accidental. Today, as Saturn stations retrograde at 14 degrees and 45 minutes of Aries, the universe seems to insist that your mind be clear enough to recognize the opportunities, lessons, and revelations approaching your life. Mercury regaining forward motion immediately before this shift creates the impression of careful orchestration rather than coincidence. There is one more detail that makes this alignment feel even more extraordinary. On this exact day, while Saturn begins its retrograde, the Moon enters Capricorn, the very sign ruled by Saturn itself. Symbolically, the collective emotional landscape steps directly into Saturn's own territory at the exact moment Saturn calls for one of its deepest reviews. That symbolism carries enormous emotional weight. The atmosphere surrounding today may feel unusually grounded, serious, focused, and unmistakably purposeful, as though invisible decisions with lasting consequences are quietly unfolding beyond ordinary awareness. If you notice an unexpected heaviness settling inside you, resist the temptation to interpret it as fear. It is not necessarily anxiety announcing danger. It may instead be your spirit recognizing that something important is shifting beneath the visible surface. Significance often carries weight because genuine transformation asks us to pay attention. This is not the universe attempting to punish you. That belief has created unnecessary fear for far too many people, and it is time to release it completely. One of the greatest misunderstandings surrounding Saturn retrograde is the assumption that it exists solely to bring hardship or correction. Every time this cycle begins, countless people react with immediate panic. They expect disaster. They prepare themselves for loss before anything has even happened. Saturn has developed a reputation that encourages people to brace for impact, believing that judgment is about to descend upon them. Those fears are understandable, because Saturn has long been associated with discipline and accountability. Yet the deeper truth is far more meaningful than the fearful stories often repeated about this planet. And understanding that difference changes everything about how this retrograde can be experienced. There is one belief about Saturn that has caused more unnecessary fear than almost anything else in modern astrology. People hear its name and immediately imagine limitation, painful lessons, restrictions, and unavoidable consequences. That reputation exists for a reason, but it tells only half of the story. The other half is rarely discussed, and once you truly understand it, your entire perspective on this retrograde can change. One realization transformed the way I looked at Saturn forever, and I hope it does the same for you. Karma has no emotion attached to it. It does not wake up deciding who deserves hardship and who deserves reward. It does not choose favorites, and it certainly is not interested in punishment for its own sake. Karma simply reflects what has already been created. It is the natural result of every decision, every sacrifice, every promise you honored, and every action you repeated until it became part of who you are. Nothing more and nothing less. Imagine planting seeds season after season. If those seeds were honesty, discipline, patience, and consistent effort, especially during the moments when no one applauded you and no one even noticed what you were carrying, then eventually there comes a season when those invisible investments begin returning something tangible. That is the side of Saturn that deserves far more attention. Yes, Saturn teaches through responsibility. but it is equally the guardian of mastery, lasting achievement, and rewards that cannot be taken away because they were built on a genuine foundation. When this retrograde begins, and karma starts reaching its next chapter, there is no reason to assume that something negative is automatically waiting around the corner. For many people, this period may become the most encouraging development they have experienced in a very long time. Saturn is beginning the process of reviewing every unseen hour of effort, every difficult decision made with integrity, every moment you chose the harder path simply because you knew it was the right one. Those quiet sacrifices have not disappeared into nothingness. They have been accumulating value. Now the universe begins recognizing what time has already recorded. That is why this retrograde should not immediately be associated with fear. It may instead represent the moment when long-delayed returns finally begin arriving. Of course, not everything survives this kind of review. Saturn has never been interested in protecting structures that lack real strength. Anything created through shortcuts, appearances, empty ambition, or commitments made purely to satisfy the ego rather than the soul becomes increasingly difficult to maintain under this energy. That is not because Saturn suddenly decides to destroy something that was healthy. Instead, it exposes weaknesses that have quietly existed for much longer than most people wanted to admit. Cracks that were hidden beneath the surface finally become impossible to ignore. If something begins falling apart during the coming months, understand what is actually happening. Saturn did not create the instability. It simply revealed the truth that had already been developing beneath the visible surface. What looks secure from the outside may never have possessed genuine strength in the first place. This understanding brings us directly to the one pattern capable of delaying the very blessings trying to reach you. The mistake mentioned earlier that catches so many people every time Saturn begins moving backward. That mistake is resistance. More specifically, it is resisting the review itself. Saturn retrograde invites reflection before acceleration. It asks you to examine your foundation before adding another floor to the building. Yet many people respond in exactly the opposite way. When life signals the need to pause, they run faster. When circumstances encourage honest evaluation, they double their effort without questioning whether they are climbing the correct mountain. That approach creates unnecessary pressure because Saturn in Aries already carries a natural tension between discipline and impulse. Aries wants immediate action. Saturn insists that every action be worthy of the future it is trying to build. During the retrograde, that contrast becomes impossible to ignore. The invitation is not to abandon progress. It is to stop racing long enough to make certain the direction still reflects your highest purpose. If you stubbornly force everything forward, the pressure often intensifies because you are working against the lesson rather than with it. If instead you willingly participate in the review, allowing yourself to examine your choices with honesty and humility, the same energy that once felt heavy begins opening doors that previously remained invisible. Very often, the breakthrough appears immediately after the willingness to stop resisting arrives. That leads us directly into the 3 zodiac signs, standing in especially powerful positions during this entire 138-day retrograde cycle. What unfolds for them carries remarkable potential, and the first sign deserves very close attention. Taurus. If your sun sign or your rising sign falls here, this message may explain experiences you have struggled to put into words. The past several months have likely demanded far more from you than most people realize. You have carried responsibilities that remained largely unseen, invested enormous emotional energy into situations that rarely offered immediate results, and continued showing up long after recognition stopped arriving. The weight has been real, even if very few people understood it. Astrologically, there is a clear reason for this experience. Saturn has been traveling through your 12th house. This is the most private and hidden area of the chart, the place connected with the subconscious mind, solitude, invisible preparation, and work completed far away from public attention. It is the realm where transformation happens before anyone else can recognize it. Throughout these past months, you may have devoted yourself to demanding professional responsibilities, carefully reorganized financial plans, carried emotional burdens for other people, or confronted deeply rooted family patterns that required extraordinary courage to heal. Yet despite all of that effort, it may have seemed as though none of it produced visible results. You may have questioned whether your energy was disappearing into empty space, wondering why every sacrifice appeared to vanish without acknowledgement or reward. If that has been your reality, your perception has not been mistaken. The nature of the 12th house is to conceal growth until the proper moment arrives. It protects preparation from premature exposure. It keeps the process hidden until the foundation becomes strong enough to support what comes next. That hidden chapter now begins changing direction. As Saturn stations retrograde today, the inward pull that has consumed so much of your energy begins gradually releasing its grip. It resembles a pressure valve slowly opening after remaining sealed for months. The accumulation of unseen effort, the karmic record of everything you continued doing behind closed doors, begins moving toward visible expression. In practical terms, this can appear through opportunities arriving unexpectedly, appreciation finding you without constant self-promotion, or financial stability finally settling into place after an extended period of uncertainty. It is important to understand exactly what these developments represent. They are not random strokes of luck. They are not gifts falling into your life without explanation. Every opportunity emerging now has roots stretching backward through months of persistence and endurance. Saturn governs time itself, and few qualities earn its respect more completely than the willingness to remain faithful to your path long after immediate rewards have disappeared from view. The reason your story is changing now is remarkably simple, even though it may not have felt simple while you were living through it. You stayed with the process when there was no guarantee that anyone would ever recognize what you were doing. You continued showing up during seasons that demanded patience instead of applause, and Saturn always keeps track of that kind of commitment. What returns to you during this retrograde is not an unexpected gift. It is the natural response to everything you refused to abandon when the results remained hidden. For Taurus, the greatest realization arriving during this cycle may be the understanding that those long stretches of solitude, uncertainty, and invisible effort were never evidence that life had forgotten you. They were preparing you in ways that could only happen away from public view. What once felt like isolation was actually a period of quiet development. You were not being pushed aside. You were establishing roots beneath the surface, creating the strength necessary to support something much larger than what could have been sustained before. Roots are never impressive while they are growing because no one can see them. Yet they determine whether everything built above the ground survives future storms. That has been your hidden work all along. Now the direction of the energy begins changing. Instead of investing everything beneath the surface, you begin witnessing tangible results emerging into the visible world. The future taking shape around you carries substance rather than illusion. It offers stability instead of temporary excitement. It creates structures capable of remaining secure even when circumstances become unpredictable. That is why this period feels so significant. You are no longer preparing only for what might happen someday. You are beginning to step into what those months of preparation were always leading toward. The shadows that once concealed your progress slowly lose their hold, allowing other people to recognize what has quietly been developing for far longer than they realize. This is not the beginning of your journey. It is the moment when years of invisible growth finally become impossible to ignore. Now the focus shifts toward Libra, because the transformation unfolding here speaks directly to personal authority. And if your sun or rising sign is Libra, there is a strong possibility You have already sensed that something fundamental has been changing inside your closest relationships. The pressure has likely been difficult to dismiss because Saturn has been traveling through your seventh house, the area governing one-on-one partnerships, marriage, business relationships, legal agreements, and every bond built upon mutual commitment. While Saturn continued its direct movement through this part of your chart, it consistently presented difficult questions that demanded complete honesty. It quietly exposed places where harmony may have become more important than authenticity. It revealed moments when preserving peace required sacrificing your own voice. It highlighted every situation where keeping someone else comfortable gradually became more important than protecting your own boundaries. Perhaps you discovered yourself giving away authority simply because confronting the imbalance felt emotionally exhausting. Maybe you accepted unequal dynamics because conflict seemed harder than compromise. Whether the relationship involved a romantic partner, a business associate, or a trusted friend, Saturn repeatedly invited you to examine where your own power had been placed into someone else's hands. Those lessons have rarely felt easy. In fact, this may have been one of the most emotionally demanding relationship chapters you have experienced in recent years, because every hidden imbalance eventually demanded your attention. As Saturn begins moving backward through this house, however, the atmosphere changes in an important way. Instead of introducing entirely new tests, the retrograde creates an opportunity to revisit situations that once ended with hesitation or uncertainty. Circumstances you believed were finished may return for another look. Familiar emotional patterns become unmistakably obvious. Relationship dynamics that once seemed confusing suddenly reveal themselves with remarkable clarity. The difference is not that the circumstances have changed. The difference is that you have changed. The inner strength you lacked before has been developing quietly through every difficult conversation, every disappointment, and every lesson that required you to choose self-respect over approval. Now you possess emotional stability that did not exist when those situations first appeared. The breakthrough waiting for Libra during this retrograde can best be understood as reclaiming complete ownership of your own center. Your sense of balance no longer depends upon another person's choices, validation, or emotional availability. Instead of searching outside yourself for stability, you become the source of that stability. Once that shift takes place, every relationship surrounding you begins responding differently. Connections built upon honesty, reciprocity, and authentic respect become noticeably stronger. Trust deepens. Communication becomes more genuine. Commitments gain greater durability because they now rest upon equality rather than obligation. At the same time, relationships sustained through imbalance cannot continue in their previous form. Bonds, where one person consistently sacrifices while another consistently benefits, gradually lose their ability to survive. Situations defined by control, manipulation, or unequal emotional investment begin reaching their natural conclusion. While that possibility may initially sound unsettling, it carries a deeper purpose that deserves recognition. This is not simply something being taken away. It is the creation of space for relationships capable of supporting the person you are becoming, instead of anchoring you to an identity you have already outgrown. Whether this transformation arrives through an important new commitment, the completion of a significant contract, or the peaceful conclusion of an arrangement that has quietly depleted your energy for far too long, the destination remains the same. You emerge from this retrograde with boundaries that no longer bend under pressure, and with relationship structures that replenish your strength instead of draining it. Few gifts Saturn can offer carry greater long-term value than that. Finally, attention turns toward Capricorn, and there is something uniquely personal unfolding here because this story reaches deeper than external events alone. Saturn is your ruling planet, the central force shaping the rhythm of your chart and influencing the way your identity develops over time. Whenever Saturn changes direction, you often feel the shift more directly than many other signs, because your own evolution is intimately connected with its movement. This retrograde is not merely another planetary event taking place somewhere beyond your awareness. It represents a profound internal recalibration, inviting you to redefine the foundation upon which your life rests. Saturn now begins its retrograde through your fourth house, the deeply private realm connected with home, family, ancestry, emotional security, and the roots from which every future chapter grows. Looking back over the past several months, there is a strong possibility that these areas have carried extraordinary weight. Responsibilities connected to family, home life, personal history, or your deepest emotional foundations may have demanded far more strength than anyone outside your closest circle could fully understand. For many Capricorns, the weight you have been carrying may not have come from one dramatic event, but from countless quiet responsibilities that slowly accumulated until they became part of your everyday life. Perhaps the focus has been your home environment. Perhaps family obligations have demanded more from you than anyone realizes. Or perhaps the greatest challenge has unfolded entirely within, as you have worked through the deeply personal process of healing old emotional wounds, releasing inherited family patterns, and becoming the parent protector and source of safety that you once needed yourself. None of that work is easy, and very little of it receives recognition. That is the nature of the fourth house. It governs the private landscape of your existence, the place where your most important transformations happen beyond the view of the outside world. This is not the kind of progress that earns applause or attracts attention. It is the silent work that happens during sleepless nights, in difficult conversations with yourself, and in the countless moments when you choose healing instead of repeating familiar cycles. It is the invisible reconstruction of your emotional foundation, the kind of effort that never appears on a professional achievement list or in a carefully curated public image. For someone with Capricorn energy, that invisibility can feel especially discouraging, because you naturally seek evidence that your dedication is producing measurable results. You want to know your effort is creating something lasting. And lately it may have seemed as though every ounce of energy has disappeared into a foundation that no one else will ever notice. Yet this is exactly where the deeper truth reveals itself. The fourth house serves as the foundation beneath the 10th house, the area connected with career, reputation, and public accomplishment. Your private world is not separate from your public success. It supports it. Everything built within eventually determines everything that can be sustained without. As Saturn begins its retrograde through this deeply personal area, its purpose changes. Instead of demanding that you constantly push toward the next milestone, it begins strengthening what has already been created. The responsibilities that once felt unbearably heavy gradually become the very structure capable of supporting your future. The emotional resilience you've been developing no longer feels like survival alone. It becomes stability. The roots you have carefully nurtured become solid ground beneath your feet. Once that internal stability settles into place, the external world naturally begins responding. Recognition in your professional life that seemed endlessly delayed can finally begin arriving. Leadership opportunities may appear where none previously existed. Financial security that once felt distant starts becoming something concrete rather than theoretical. None of these developments emerge because of chance or fortunate timing alone. They appear because Saturn recognizes that the structure beneath them has finally become strong enough to carry greater responsibility. In symbolic terms, Saturn looks at everything you have quietly constructed and confirms that it can now support the future you have been working toward. For Capricorn, this retrograde offers a deeply personal breakthrough. Your inner reality finally begins reflecting your outer ambitions instead of contradicting them. The distance between who you truly are and the person the world sees begins disappearing. There is an extraordinary sense of returning to yourself, as though the constant effort to appear strong is replaced by genuine inner strength that no longer requires performance. Confidence becomes something you embody rather than something you attempt to project. That is a transformation capable of changing every area of your life. Of course, these lessons are not reserved only for Taurus, Libra, or Capricorn. Every single sign will experience this retrograde in a meaningful way, because Saturn will be reviewing a different area within every birth chart. From now until December 10th, when Saturn stations direct at 7 degrees Aries, after completing this 138-day retrograde, the universe continually returns to one central question. Is the life you have been building supported by something authentic and lasting? The answer will look different for every individual. For some people, the review centers on professional direction and long-term purpose. Others will find relationships becoming the primary focus. For someone else, finances, health, personal beliefs, or even identity itself may become the area where Saturn asks for greater honesty. Wherever the review appears, its purpose remains remarkably consistent. Saturn brings your attention directly toward the places where uncomfortable truths have been postponed or where temporary solutions have replaced lasting ones. This is never about humiliation or punishment. It is about revealing exactly what requires strengthening before the next chapter can safely begin. That is why this period is generally not the ideal time for forcing major new beginnings into existence. If you have been preparing to launch an entirely new business, make an enormous commitment, or dramatically redirect your life all at once, the wiser approach during this retrograde is not permanent hesitation, but thoughtful patience. There is an important distinction between stopping and pausing. Saturn encourages the second, not necessarily the first. This retrograde strongly favors repairing existing structures, completing unfinished responsibilities, strengthening weak foundations, and honoring commitments that already deserve your attention before extending yourself toward entirely new ones. Perhaps the greatest lesson Saturn offers throughout this entire transit concerns the value of patience itself. In Saturn's world, patience outweighs raw talent. It carries greater importance than ambition alone. It even surpasses speed. Saturn consistently rewards those who continue building long after immediate rewards disappear. It honors the people willing to tolerate uncertainty without abandoning their values. It respects those who continue choosing discipline while no one else is paying attention. If that description reflects your experience, if you have quietly questioned whether your persistence would ever matter, then this retrograde may become the answer you have been waiting to receive. During these 138 days, Saturn begins evaluating every unseen investment you have made. Modern culture often celebrates shortcuts, immediate success, and rapid achievement, but Saturn has never operated according to those standards. Instead, it quietly asks a much more meaningful question. What did you continue creating when there was no audience? What responsibilities did you continue honoring when giving up would have been easier? Can you honestly stand beside everything you have built and accept complete responsibility for it without looking away? If your answer is yes, then the rewards emerging during this retrograde may reach far beyond your expectations, because they will rest upon something real rather than temporary excitement. The structures strengthened over the coming months are likely to support your life for years ahead. Build them with integrity. Build them with patience. Build them with honesty. Trust that every unseen effort has been recorded, even when it felt invisible. The universe has never stopped observing the choices you made in silence, and for many people, especially those who have carried extraordinary responsibilities without recognition for far too long, this retrograde becomes the season when those long overdue returns finally begin arriving. Before we finish, I simply want to say thank you for staying with me until the very end, because this has been one of the most meaningful conversations we have shared. If these insights spoke to your experience and you would like to continue exploring astrology and spiritual timing together, I would truly appreciate having you subscribe and join this community. I would also love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me your zodiac sign. Share what has been unfolding in your life recently. Let me know whether these messages reflected what you have been feeling. I take time to read every comment because right now our shared experiences matter more than ever. Each story reminds us that none of us is navigating these powerful cycles alone. Be kind to yourself as this retrograde unfolds, and I look forward to sharing the next journey with you very soon.